Rebecca slammed the door shut behind her, eyes blazing with fury. "I've had enough, Ben. If you don't cut her out of our lives, I will." Ben looked up from his phone, startled. "Amy, my sister? What the hell happened now, Rebecca?" "She's trying to ruin us," Rebecca snapped, her voice trembling with emotion. "What are you talking about?" Ben asked, putting down his phone and standing up. "Tonight was supposed to be our anniversary dinner. It was just for us," Rebecca said. "But Amy had to show up uninvited and create a scene." Ben sighed. "What did she do this time?" Rebecca crossed her arms, anger and frustration clear on her face. "She made a spectacle, drunk and obnoxious. She picked a fight with the waiter, embarrassed us in front of all those people." "She's going through a lot, Rebecca," Ben said, his tone defensive. "She's not herself lately." "That's your excuse every time." Rebecca's voice was rising. "You always take her side, Ben." "She's family, Rebecca. She needs me." Rebecca shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "This isn't the first time she's pulled something like this. Remember our wedding?" Ben's face tightened at the mention of their wedding. "That was different," he mumbled, knowing full well it wasn't. "Different?" Rebecca echoed. "She tried to hijack it, Ben. She made that day all about her." Ben opened his mouth to speak, but didn't have the words. He knew Rebecca was right. Amy had always been a tornado, drawing attention and creating chaos wherever she went. "You never see it," Rebecca continued, softer now. "You never see what she's doing to us, to you." "Rebecca," Ben began, but she cut him off. "No, listen to me." Rebecca's voice was low but firm. "Every time she disrupts our lives, you excuse it. You say she needs help, that she's family, that things will change, but they never do." Ben rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his sister's actions pressing on him. "What do you want me to do, Rebecca? She's my sister." "I want you to set boundaries, Ben," Rebecca said, her tone pleading. "I want you to put us first for once." Ben looked into his wife's eyes, seeing the hurt and exhaustion there. He knew Rebecca was right. Amy was a problem he'd been avoiding for too long. "I'll talk to her," Ben said finally. "I'll make sure she knows she can't keep doing this." Rebecca nodded but didn't seem convinced. "It's not just about talking, Ben. You need to be firm." "I will," Ben promised, though even he wasn't sure he believed it. "I just need time to figure it out." Rebecca shook her head, turning away. "Time's running out, Ben." The room fell silent, the weight of their confrontation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. As Ben watched Rebecca walk away, he couldn't help but feel the intensifying rift between them, a rift that his sister had helped carve deeper and deeper over the years. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom window as I woke up, feeling the tension from last night still hanging in the air. Ben was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I knew I had to address the issue before it consumed our weekend. "Amy called," Ben said as I entered the kitchen, his tone already defensive. "Of course she did. What does she want now?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. "She says she's lonely and asked if she could stay over this weekend," Ben said, avoiding my eyes. I could feel the anger rising in me. "Ben, we've been planning this romantic getaway for weeks. We need this time alone." "I know, but she sounded really upset." "Maybe just this once?" Ben pleaded. "It's never just once with her," I snapped. "She's always here, imposing on our lives. We barely get any time to ourselves." Ben sighed. "I'll talk to her. Maybe she won't stay the whole weekend." "She shouldn't be here at all," I said, my voice firm. "We deserve this time together, Ben. You promised." Before Ben could respond, there was a knock at the door. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as he opened it to reveal Amy standing there, a suitcase in hand. "Surprise!" Amy said, a forced smile on her face. "I figured you'd say yes, so I came over early." I shot Ben a look, and he grimaced. "Amy, we talked about this. You can't just show up uninvited." "Oh, come on, Ben. It's just one weekend," Amy said, brushing past him into the living room. "It's never just one weekend, Amy," I said, trying to keep my cool. "We've had this planned for a long time." "I know, and I'm sorry, but I really need this. I'm so lonely and bored," Amy whined. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "You knew we had plans. This isn't fair to us." Amy rolled her eyes. "You're always so dramatic, Rebecca. It's just a few days. I won't be a burden." "You are a burden, Amy," I said, my patience wearing thin. "We need our space." "Ben, do you hear how she talks to me?" Amy turned to her brother, trying to play the victim. "Amy, enough. Rebecca's right. You can't keep doing this, Ben said, surprising me with his firmness. Amy's eyes narrowed, but she forced a smile. Fine, I'll find somewhere else to stay. I'm sorry, Amy, but it's for the best, Ben said, standing his ground. As Amy left, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was only a temporary victory, and I knew she would be back. But for now, we had our weekend house, and I hoped it would be enough to remind Ben of what really mattered. We'll have a great weekend, Ben said softly, taking my hand. I hope so, I replied, squeezing his hand. We need this. It had only been a few days since our brief weekend reprieve. That morning, I walked into the living room to find Ben pacing back and forth, cell phone pressed to his ear. His face was tense, lined with worry. She lost her job and apartment, I heard him say. My heart sank. She what? I interrupted, eyes wide with disbelief. Ben held up a hand, signaling for me to wait. Yeah, okay, I'll come get you. He hung up and faced me, his expression filled with concern. Amy's in trouble, Rebecca. She lost her job and her place. She needs somewhere to stay. She said it's temporary. I don't believe this, I said, anger boiling up inside me. She always needs something. When will it end? Rebecca, she's my sister. I can't just leave her out there, Ben argued. But this isn't fair to us, Ben. We've done more than enough for her, I insisted, crossing my arms. I know, but she's family. Just for a little while, I promise. Gripping the back of a chair, I took a deep breath. Fine, but it better be temporary. Ben nodded and quickly left to pick her up. A couple of hours later, Amy walked in, her face looking worn but with that familiar smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Thanks for letting me stay, you guys, she said, dropping her bags by the couch. I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. Amy, if you're going to stay here, you need to follow the house rules. Oh, of course, Amy said sweetly, though her eyes betrayed her insincerity. Days turned into weeks, and soon it felt like Amy was becoming a permanent fixture in our home. She claimed she was looking for jobs, but more often than not, she was lounging around, watching TV. Any luck with the job search? I asked one afternoon, unable to hide the sarcasm in my voice. Amy barely looked up from her phone. Not yet. It's tough out there. It's been a month, Amy. You need to put in more effort, I said, trying to restrain my frustration. Do you think you could maybe ease off, Rebecca? She snapped back, glaring at me. I'm doing my best. Ben walked in just as the argument was escalating. What's going on? Amy's been here for a month already, Ben. She needs to find a job and move out, I said firmly. I'm trying, Ben, but she's constantly on my case, Amy said, her voice dripping with false innocence. Ben sighed, looking torn. Amy, you do need to find a solution soon. This was supposed to be temporary. Yeah, I know. I'm working on it, Amy replied, a hint of annoyance in her tone. Later that night, I confronted Ben in our bedroom. She's exploiting your kindness, Ben. She's not trying to leave. I know it's hard, but she's still my sister, Ben said, his voice weary. I just need more time to figure out what to do. If she stays any longer, it's going to hurt us, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Ben sighed deeply. I'll talk to her again. We'll figure this out. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of Amy moving around in the next room, I realized that talk alone wouldn't solve this. I had to take a stand, not just for my sake, but for our marriage. A few days after our tense conversation, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. Amy's presence in our home was driving a wedge between Ben and me, and I was determined to get to the bottom of her manipulations. I needed proof. One morning, when Amy had gone out for a supposed job interview, I sat down at Ben's computer. With a mix of guilt and resolve, I started sifting through their shared bank statements and emails. It didn't take long for the patterns to emerge. Amy's constant withdrawals, extravagant purchases, all under the guise of needing help. I heard the front door open and quickly closed the browser. Amy walked in, looking far too cheerful for someone supposedly struggling. How was the interview? I asked, forcing a smile. Oh, you know how it is, she replied flippantly. They said they'd call me. That evening after Ben got home, I waited for Amy to head to her room before approaching him. Ben, we need to talk, I said, my voice hushed but urgent. About what? He asked, already sensing my serious tone. I've been looking into things, I began, pulling out the printed bank statements. Amy hasn't been honest with us. Look at these withdrawals, these purchases. She's been manipulating you, Ben. Ben's face paled as he scanned the pages. She said she needed help with basic expenses. I didn't know. I know she's your sister, but she's been lying to us, I said softly but firmly. Ben shook his head, disbelief and hurt in his eyes. Why would she do this? I think she's taking advantage of your kindness. She knows you'll always come to her rescue, I said. But this has to stop, Ben, for us. I need to talk to her, he said, still processing the shock. That night, as we sat down for dinner, Ben decided it was time to confront Amy. I could tell he was nervous, but he had to face the truth. Amy, we need to talk about your situation here, Ben said, his voice steady but strained. What do you mean? Amy asked, her eyes narrowing. Rebecca found some things today, Ben said, sliding the bank statements across the table. You've been using my money to fund your lifestyle. This isn't just about rent or food. Amy's face flushed with anger. How dare you snoop through my personal business, she yelled, glaring at me. It's our business when you're exploiting us, I shot back. You need to leave, Amy. This can't go on. Ben nodded, finally standing firm. Rebecca's right. You need to find another place to stay. We can't do this anymore. Amy's expression twisted with rage and desperation. You're choosing her over me? Your own sister? I have to put my marriage first, Amy. That Ben said quietly but resolutely. You need to go. Amy stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The weight of the confrontation hung in the air, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'm proud of you, I said to Ben, reaching out to hold his hand. We'll get through this, he replied, squeezing my hand. As we sat in the quiet of our now peaceful home, I knew that this was just the beginning. Amy's departure would bring challenges, but it was a necessary step towards reclaiming our lives. And this time, I was ready for whatever came next. Amy's departure left a palpable void in the house, but the tension between Ben and me had only slightly eased. The damage had been done, and trust had been breached. I knew I had to take additional steps to ensure that Amy's presence in our lives was permanently diminished. One evening, an idea struck me. I needed to gather irrefutable evidence of Amy's deceit. I decided to lay a trap. If Amy's true nature was exposed in front of friends and family, it would become impossible for Ben to continue making excuses for her. Ben, I've been thinking, I said while making dinner. We should throw a surprise birthday party for you next week. A nice gathering with our close friends and family. A party? Ben seemed hesitant. With everything going on? Yes, exactly because of that, I insisted. We need something good to bring people together. Plus, it'll be fun. After a little more convincing, Ben agreed. The plan was set into motion. I sent out invitations and made sure Amy got the information. Next, I concocted a plan with a few close friends to help gather more concrete proof of Amy's manipulations. On the day of the party, our house was filled with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. I moved through the rooms, greeting guests and setting everything in place. Amy arrived late, fashionably dressed, but with an air of entitlement that made my blood boil. The moment came when I took the stage, tapping a glass to get everyone's attention. I just want to say a few words, I began, smiling at Ben, who looked slightly uncomfortable. Today we celebrate not just Ben's birthday, but the people who matter most in our lives. I gestured subtly to my friend Laura, who nodded and started projecting the documents I had gathered. Bank statements, emails, credit card bills, all with Amy's name and traces of her lies popped up on the screen. Amy, why don't you tell everyone about these? I said, my voice calm but firm. Amy turned white, her eyes narrowing into slits. What is this? How dare you? She spat, facing the crowd. The room fell silent as everyone's eyes shifted from the screen to Amy. Ben rose, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Ben, this is a setup, Amy cried, looking wounded. They're lying. Ben shook his head, finally seeing the reality of her deceit. Amy, these are your statements. You've been lying to us all along. This isn't fair, Amy snarled, her mask slipping. You can't do this. I'm your sister. I think it's time you leave, Ben said quietly but with finality in his voice. Mutters of agreement filled the room as Amy stormed out, furious and humiliated. Once the door slammed shut behind her, the tension in the room eased, replaced by a sense of relief and vindication. You didn't have to do it this way, Ben said, his eyes meeting mine. This was the only way you would see the truth, Ben, I replied softly but firmly. She couldn't keep hurting us. The rest of the evening continued, subdued but supportive. Our friends and family rallied around us, offering comfort and understanding. As I looked around at the people who truly mattered, I felt a sense of closure. Ben and I stood together near the end of the party, hand in hand. "Thank you for standing by me," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We are stronger together," I replied, holding on to him tightly. And with that, we began the slow, steady process of healing and rebuilding our lives, free from the deceptive shadow of Amy. In the days following the party, Amy's exposure became the talk of our social circle. As relieved as I was to finally have the truth out, I knew the fallout was far from over. Ben was still grappling with the betrayal, and despite his firm stand at the party, he remained conflicted. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, Ben's phone rang. He glanced at it, sighed, and picked it up. "It's Amy." I braced myself, listening to his side of the conversation. "Amy, this isn't the time. No, you need to understand. No, I can't keep doing this. You need help, Amy. Goodbye." He hung up, looking drained. "She's still trying to play the victim," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "I'm not surprised," I said. "But you did the right thing, Ben. We need to focus on us now." Ben nodded but looked lost. "It's just hard to turn my back on her after all these years." I reached out and took his hand. "You're not turning your back on her, Ben. You're setting boundaries. There's a difference." A couple of days later, we decided it was time to publicly confront the situation with our friends and family once and for all. We gathered them at our house for a straightforward discussion. "I know everyone has heard bits and pieces about what happened with Amy," Ben began, his voice steady but emotional. "I want to clear the air and explain why we had to take such drastic steps." I stood by his side, feeling his hand tighten around mine for support. "Amy has been manipulating us for a long time. When we put the evidence together, it was clear she was taking advantage of Ben's kindness and our resources." There were murmurs of agreement and disbelief among the group. Our friends and family exchanged looks of sympathy and understanding. Ben's eyes scanned the room, filled with a mixture of apology and resolution. "I've realized that protecting her all these years only enabled her behavior. It was time to make a change." At that moment, the front door burst open. Amy stood there, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you? You're lying to everyone," she screamed. Gasps filled the room, and all eyes turned toward Amy. I felt my heart race, but I stood my ground. "Amy, you need to leave," I said firmly. "No, I'm setting the record straight," she shouted. "They've turned everyone against me with their lies." "Amy, you've done this to yourself," Ben said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and frustration. "We have the proof. Everyone has seen it. You think you can just cut me out of your life?" Amy spat, her eyes wild. "I'll find a way back. You'll see." "No, you won't," Ben replied with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. "You need to get help, Amy. Until then, you are no longer welcome here." Amy's face twisted with rage, but she could see the resolve in Ben's eyes. With one last venomous glare, she stormed out. The room remained silent, the weight of the confrontation lingering in the air. "Thank you all for being here," I said softly, my voice breaking the silence. "It's been a difficult journey, but with your support, we can move forward." Our friends and family approached us individually, offering hugs and words of comfort. As the evening came to a close, Ben and I stood together, emotionally exhausted but stronger for having faced the storm head-on. "We did the right thing," but Ben whispered, his voice strained but certain. "We did," I replied, leaning into him. We both knew that while the road to healing would be long, we were finally on the right path, together. The days following Amy's explosive exit from our home were a complex blend of relief and lingering tension. Ben and I tried to find our footing again, the house quiet without Amy's disruptive presence. One evening, as Ben and I sat quietly on the porch, sipping tea, he turned to me. "Rebecca, I know it's been hard on both of us. I want to thank you for standing by me through everything." I nodded, feeling his sincerity. "We are in this together, Ben. Always." Just as we were embracing a moment of peace, the piercing sound of the doorbell interrupted us. I exchanged a glance with Ben, sensing something was off. Opening the door, I found myself face to face with Amy. Her eyes were red, but it wasn't sorrow I saw there, it was fury. "What are you doing here, Amy?" Ben asked. His voice has a mix of concern and frustration. I'm here because you're my brother, and you're all I have left, she replied, her tone shifting to one of desperation. Amy, we've been through this. You need help we can't give you, I said, standing firm. Amy's eyes narrowed, and her voice turned venomous. So it's her or me, huh, Ben? Choose. Ben's face grew pale. Amy, please don't do this. Do what? Make you choose? You always choose her, don't you? Amy spat, her words slicing through the air. Amy. That's not fair, Ben replied, his voice shaking. It's not about choosing sides. You need to take responsibility. Responsibility? Amy scoffed. You're my brother. You promised to take care of me? There was a painful silence. I could see Ben's internal struggle written all over his face. He took a deep breath and stood taller. Amy, I love you, but you have to leave, Ben said quietly but firmly. You cannot keep coming back when things don't go your way. You're hurting yourself and us. Amy's face twisted in rage. You're throwing me away for her. I'll destroy you both. You need to leave, Amy, I said, my voice hardening. Now. With a last hate-filled glare, Amy stormed out of our lives once more, leaving us standing in a tense, heavy silence. As the darkness settled around us, I turned to Ben, seeing the pain in his eyes. Ben, we did what we had to, I said, trying to comfort him. I know, he replied, their voices trembling. It doesn't make it hurt any less. We went back inside, closing the door to the night and, symbolically, to Amy's toxic influence. There was a sadness in the air, but for the first time there was also a glimmer of hope. Ben, we'll get through this, I said, taking his hand. He nodded, squeezing my hand in return. Yes, we will, together. As we sat back on the couch, the quiet of our home felt strangely comforting. The journey had been rough, but the future now seemed a little less daunting. Together we were ready to rebuild what had been broken and look forward to a life free from Amy's shadow. Amy's departure marked a turning point for us. The house was calmer, and Ben and I were tentatively stepping into the healing process. Each morning felt lighter, but the memory of Amy's threats still loomed. One weekend, Ben and I decided to repaint the living room. It was a small act of reclaiming our space. As we worked, I sensed the unspoken tension easing with each stroke of the brush. This is therapeutic, Ben remarked, dipping his roller into the paint. Yeah, it feels like a fresh start, I replied, smiling. Later that week, Ben came home with a rare smile on his face. I got a promotion at work today, he announced. That's amazing, I said, wrapping my arms around him. Congratulations, Ben. Thanks, Rebecca, he said, his eyes sparkling. I couldn't have done it without your support. Our lives slowly began to stabilize. Yet, despite the progress, Amy's presence wasn't entirely gone. Sometimes we'd hear snippets about her from mutual acquaintances. Most of it wasn't good. Job rejections, broken relationships. Her manipulations had caught up with her. One evening, as we prepared dinner, Ben's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and turned pale. It's from Peter, Amy's ex-boyfriend. What does he want? I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. He says Amy's really hit rock bottom. She's been reaching out to people, begging for help, but no one trusts her anymore, Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. Ben, you did everything you could, I said softly. She's facing the consequences of her actions. He nodded, eyes distant. I know, it's just hard to see her like this, even after everything. A few days later, while out grocery shopping, we ran into Jeff, my dad. He gave us both a tight hug. How are things, kids? We're doing better, Dad, I said. Jeff looked at Ben with a fatherly warmth. You two have been through the ringer, but I see you're coming out stronger. It's been tough, but we're getting there, Ben replied. As the weeks rolled by, the distance from Amy's toxic presence became more tangible. Our marriage felt renewed. We were rediscovering each other in ways we hadn't been able to before. On a quiet Sunday morning, Ben turned to me as we sipped our coffee on the porch. Rebecca, I know I've said this before, but I need you to understand just how much your support means to me. His words filled me with warmth. We're a team, Ben, and we'll get through anything together. Just then our neighbor Carol leaned over the fence. Morning, beautiful day, isn't it? Sure is, Carol, I responded, smiling. Carol looked hesitant but spoke up. I heard about Amy. Must have been hard, but you did the right thing, Rebecca. Thank you, Carol, Ben said, his voice filled with gratitude. As the days turned into months, the echoes of Amy's manipulations faded. We were rebuilding our lives, stronger and more united. Each step forward was a reminder that we had the strength to overcome anything, together. With every sunrise, our future felt brighter. The lessons of the past had made us resilient, and though the scars might remain, we were ready to embrace the new chapters of our story.